As am I.
So let me share my screen and I will find the norms. Okay.
I love changing
So
diapers.
we have stay engaged. It's important that you try to stay present in the room. Pay attention to when you are shutting down. Discomfort and anxiety are normal parts of courageous conversations. If you find yourself needing to stand up, please do so. If you find yourself drifting, use strategies that will help you stay present. Of course, it goes without saying, if you've got to run to the restroom, don't sit quaking and I gotta go. Stay with the topic. When you feel discomfort, it's easy to take the conversation someplace different. Resist the urge to change the topic to another ism. One reason it's hard to stay on topic of racism is because it can bring up issues of guilt, shame, and anger. However difficult it may become, we want to stay engaged in the race conversation. Checking out the conversation when it becomes uncomfortable is one form of privilege protection. Okay.
Look at me.
Okay. Would somebody have a comment or a question? Okay. The purpose of having these conversations is to be able to speak our truths about our experiences. If not here, where? If not now, when? We often avoid speaking our truth for fear of what others might say. It's important that we created an environment where everyone is free to speak openly so that learning can occur. Keep in mind that people are in different places in this work. In order for us to grow, it's important that people are able to share their thoughts in a way that's comfortable for them. When we share our thoughts, it often creates an emotional reaction from others. Being able to speak your truth does not mean that people will not respond emotionally. Be prepared to experience the discomfort that race conversations bring. Speaking our truth does not mean stomping on each other's heads. Before speaking, think about what it is you want others to know, how they can best hear you, whose interests are being served. When speaking, are you creating enemies or allies? When you speak, are you speaking to put others down or put them in their place? Or are you speaking so that new learning can occur for others in the room? Remember that everyone does not communicate in the same way that you do. If someone gets loud in the room, it doesn't mean that they're angry. If they're angry, it doesn't necessarily mean they're angry with you. We'll talk a little bit about some of those lessons when I get my friend Melanie in on this one. If they are angry with something you said, it doesn't mean that the person no longer has a relationship with you. Oftentimes, these conversations bring up a lot of emotions from past and present experiences. Try and allow others to experience their emotions without you shutting down. One of the characteristics of dominance is to speak as if you represent all people's perspectives rather than your own. We call this the universal you, as in, you know how we enjoy chocolate. The universal you allows you to say something without taking personal ownership of your opinions. Try to avoid the universal you and instead speak for yourself by making I versus we statements. No fixing. It is human nature to want to fix other people's pain and discomfort, particularly when they are crying or are clearly distressed. However, it's important that we let each person in the room experience their own discomfort and not fix it for them. This is a part of their learning. Sometimes people will want to fix each other by reassuring them about their lack of stereotypes or racism. This is often the case when they share that identity with the person who is acknowledging their biases. For example, a white woman telling another white woman she's not prejudiced. If you find yourself wanting to fix someone, explore what might be coming up about your own identity. If you find yourself wanting to fix a situation or make someone feel better, pause for a moment and reflect on what is going on in you. Experience discomfort. One way to think about this is learn to become comfortable with the discomfort. In other words, being uncomfortable is to be expected. If you're not feeling any sense of discomfort in the dialogue, ask yourself, are you fully engaged? Are you fully giving yourself are you giving of yourself fully and taking risks? Many people confuse safety and comfort. You can have a perfectly safe conversation where people are very uncomfortable. Often, people who are experiencing oppression will be blamed for making members of the dominant culture uncomfortable. You may hear, race wasn't an issue before these workshops created all the problems. Avoiding conversations for the sake of comfort serves to reinforce white privilege. Take risks. The more you're willing to risk, the more potential you have to learn. By staying silent out of the fear of saying something wrong, avoiding conflict, or making someone else uncomfortable, you miss the opportunity to authentically engage with one another. You also miss out on the opportunity to grow in your understanding. Finally, listen for understanding. Try and understand where another person is coming from as best you can. This was a hard lesson for me last week. And again, Melanie's going to help illuminate this for us. Be careful not to compare your experiences with another person's. For example, saying gender oppression is the same as racial oppression. This often invalidates or minimizes a person's experience. Listen without thinking about how you are going to respond. Stay present in their pain and your discomfort as you listen. If someone is pointing out how what you said left them feeling, try not to explain or rationalize what you said or why you said it. For example, sometimes it's necessary to just say, I didn't realize what I said was inappropriate, or I didn't mean to hurt you, I'm sorry. Think about your comments before saying them. Resist the need to explain. Sometimes positive intent is not enough. Intent versus impact. Be careful not to lose the opportunity to just listen. Don't put the focus back on you. Expect and accept non-closure. In our society today, we often want to feel some sense of closure, regardless of the issue. There will be fortunate situations where you will be able to resolve something between you and another person, but more times than not, it will feel unfinished. Sometimes you will have to circle back around, at another time reconcile differences, and other times you will have to sit with non-closure. Engaging race conversations mean there will be times of no closure. This is an ongoing work that does not necessarily leave one walking away feeling like everything turned out the way you hoped. Be willing to take risks and accept that much of this is about changing yourself, not others. White cultural norms focus on the product rather than the process. These are process conversations where greater awareness leads to future changes. Note, when we explain the norms, we do not open up an opportunity for participants to make suggestions about the norms. We can skip that part. Any questions or comments about the norms?
Can you talk about the process and the products a little bit more, Michael? Can you drill down?
Sure. I mean, if you think about civil rights, first of all, the fight for civil rights in America has been around since before the nation was a country. This fight is not gonna end. Racism is not gonna end. White privilege will not go away. What we're working to do is become white allies to help change the systems of oppression. But what we're going to talk about in a moment is an error that I made this week, right? I'm somebody who considers myself pretty progressive about this, and I made some significant mistakes. And these are mistakes that no matter how well-intentioned any of us might be, we will continue to make. So that's why we're never going to get to the end. We're never going to be able to, any of us as white people, say, I totally get what Black people are going through. I totally get what women are going through or Indigenous people are going through. Because for us, it's always a process of engaging and listening and redefining our understanding. So it's frustrating for somebody to actually have to admit to themselves, but we're never going to arrive. This is pure journey. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. Thank you for doing that.
Any other thoughts or comments as we continue? Okay. I have an interesting way to begin tonight's discussion. And I committed an egregious act of white fragility last week. For any of you who are my friends on Facebook, I very reluctantly kept the whole exchange on Facebook, but I had to keep it there. In the story, I thought I started out as the hero, and it turns out I ended up the villain in the story. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Melanie. I've known Melanie since I was 16 years old, so we are really, truly dear friends. And she did two very important things for me. When I committed a serious mistake on Facebook, she checked in, and then she checked me. This is my own personal phrase now. Check in, check me. And the reason that I think that this is important for me to remember, and why I kind of like saying it, is the first thing she asked me is, emotionally, Michael, are you okay? Because you were really angry. And she wanted to make sure I was okay, which is wonderful. And that was the first place she approached me with. And then she did the other important part. Here's what you did. And she held me accountable for things I said and did in a reasonable and kind way. So she checked in, and then she checked me. And I'm going to turn this over to Melanie because she can more objectively tell the story. than I can. So take it away, Melanie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I pulled up the actual exchange, so I'm quoting accurately. So a couple weeks ago, Michael posted in defense of some of his dear friends named Karen. Okay, somebody's got to say it. Some of the sweetest, smartest friends I have are named Karen. I think referring to entitled women as Karens is highly inappropriate. And some of his Facebook friends, which I believe included his students, took him to task for focusing on what they called a non-issue. Some of them agreed, some friends agreed with him, but
In the invitation in Facebook in the event period.
oh, sorry, Michael.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. One of his friends really took him to task and asked if he would go as hard for the words that are actually offensive and derogatory. And Michael's response was, do not, even for a second, doubt my anti-racism. Do not, all caps. So I started watching this as a spectator, and I watched the story unfold where some of his Facebook friends were trying to remind him that where the term Karen came from, that it's currently being used rather sexistly, but it has a long history of being used to kind of announce racist behavior of a certain demographic of white women. And Michael reacted by getting incredibly defensive. And he decided to talk about his resume of all the things that he has done to be an ally and be an anti-racist. And this is where I saw he had fallen right into the trap of white fragility. He got incredibly angry, incredibly defensive. He started to go into ego and defend his actions with all of the good and positive things that he's done, while some of his friends reminded him that this is a time to listen. So he got trounced, and he reacted totally from ego, and I had to call him, and I had to see first how he was doing, because I've never seen him lose his shit, so to speak, on Facebook quite like that. He's usually really diplomatic, and he's usually the voice of reason in some pretty gnarly conversations, and he failed. Sorry.
No.
For lack of a better word.
There is no better way to say it. Failure is exactly what it was. I can add a little bit more
And
to
it's
story.
tough. It's tough to, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Melanie. No, you get.
I was gonna say it's tough. It's tough to call your friend and ask and point out that they got caught up in the net of exactly what they are hoping to teach.
Especially the guy that organized this literature circle. I fell into it. Ask first.
Yeah, and so I kept reminding him, because he was like, I'm going to take it down. And I was like, no, don't. It's a total teachable moment. I mean, it's exactly what we're talking about. That fragile spark that she talks about in the book, where progressives, people who feel like they're allies, feel like they get it, are the ones that get super defensive when we're taken to task for behavior that is racist, right? So Michael, to his credit, came around pretty quickly. So
Yeah, I was so angry, I was shaking, on the verge of tears, angry. And I had to confront a reality about my ego. I'm an agnostic Buddhist, and Buddhists are not supposed to be fiercely in defense of their egos, right? So I went for a nice late night walk that night under the moonlight, and I reflected about what I had done. And I mean, when I was in college, I was donating money to Amnesty International to fight apartheid. So at one point I told Salvador, my friend online, and all of the ones who checked me, by the way, this is interesting, are former students, either at Amy Beale or Max. And they all took me on. And it was a glorious moment to see 4 students become my teacher. And that was a powerful thing to see. So I went on my walk and I'm like, okay, Dolce, are you doing this stuff because it's the right thing to do? Or do you need to be recognized as doing this stuff? And then my ego got held in check and I realized I was defending my stupid ass ego. Granted, part of my criticism of what came at me, some of it was sarcastic, or at least on Facebook, you can interpret the worst tone and I interpret it as sarcastic. And I don't think necessarily that they were nice about the way they challenged me, all of them. But then I have to use empathy. If you take the hundreds of years of intolerance and oppression, I'm going to have to forgive anyone who comes at me and tells me, no, one person literally said, Michael, Black people don't care how you feel. So I'm going to maybe hear that 3 times a year at most. It's not going to be a message that I have to receive daily, unconsciously, with a continual repetition. So if somebody is going to come at me, a person of color, and they're not going to necessarily be polite about it, I have to have that big picture in mind that, you know what, I'm going to have to take it. And if I had listened, if I had just responded by saying, okay, whoa, because I come in with this thing about Karens, and I'm thinking about the women who are complaining about wearing masks at stores and all that. I'm not thinking about the origin of Karen being the white women who call the police on Black men and get Black men killed. And that's what they told me, that's what Karen is, and that's why we use Karen. And if I'd listened, I could have had a civil conversation in which I could have been peaceably instructed, but instead, I shut people down. And of those 4 students, I sent each of them emails saying, please forgive me, I'm trying my best to be a white ally, but I screw up. 2 out of the 4 forgave me, 1 unfriended me. And I don't blame the one that never emailed me back, and I don't blame the one who unfriended me. The politics of civility have passed. And so if that's what I get for my failure, then I have to suck it up. Interesting learning experience. And some of what I experienced is what was talked about in the chapters we read. So first, let me thank you, Melanie, for checking in and checking me. And if anyone has any thoughts you want to add to that, especially anyone who saw the exchange yourselves, please feel free.
I didn't see the exchange, I just met you, but the first thing I made a note of from the book was actually related to that. I made a note that said, quoting from the book, we uphold and perpetuate racism when we are so defensive that our certitude makes it virtually impossible to explain to us how we do so. And it's just interesting because I think when we're thinking about ourselves and our integrity and what makes us who we are and the things we're passionate about, we do tend to get very defensive. And when that's called into question, why we're doing something, why we're defending something to begin with, we get defensive. And one of the things we can be most defensive about is if we're called racist in any way, because we don't think we are. And that becomes the whole, center of this. But I think one of the things for me as I've begun listening is realizing this isn't about me. It's not about me. And I have to tell myself that. We have to do a lot of reflection. But like you said, if somebody else is angry in their words, especially someone of color, they are exhausted and we're tired of a few weeks,
And also,
we need to step back.
and there's an important reality to it too. I had 4 people willing to challenge me. Why? What they said unconsciously was, hey, Dolce, we respect you. We love you enough to challenge you on this. If you were somebody we didn't respect, we would just ignore you. We would unfriend you. We would just whatever. But no, they made the conscious decision to checkmate. And rather than interpret that as a sign of respect and appreciation, I did the total opposite. And as we've discussed before, it's not BIPOC, it's not their responsibility to teach us about white privilege and racism. So the fact that 4 people of color chose to do that for me was actually an amazing and significant thing. I should have taken it as a compliment rather than as an insult.
Hey, Michael, I keep seeing Jacob posting text questions. I'm not sure if you can see those, but I can't see all of what his questions are, but I can't tell if if he had a few questions or if he's making comments, if he doesn't have audio, maybe.
Oh, I'll just turn my mute off. I'm
Okay.
very inquisitive.
No worries. I just
Hello,
kept seeing
everyone.
them
My
pop
name's
up and-
Jacob.
Hi, Jake. Yeah, bring these.
I like long walks on the beach. I'm a Pisces.
We have so much in common.
As a 7th grade history teacher who has diverse populations that experience history through their own perspectives and narratives, I want to reflect on my own white fragility so I can create a safe learning space for my own students to take down some of that systemic racism. And I know that I posed some maybe controversial questions in chat. Michael, if you've had a chance to look at that. My first question is, what qualifies you to lead a discussion group like this yourself, being someone who appears white? When we're having a discussion on race that maybe some people might feel should have a more Black perspective, especially if we're experiencing something in our narrative as we are now in this space in history. I mean, I want to interject that I'm a gay educator in a very conservative location in East County, and I use my classroom as a safe space to create dialogue, and I know it creates like the book talks about stress, this uncomfortable experience where you start to have that palpitation in your heart, and you go, well, what do I say? I don't want to appear racist. I don't want to. I mean, right now I feel like I'm taking the floor in a way that I shouldn't, because there's some topics I'm
going to be
curious
fluid and
about.
know where it goes. But Jacob, first of all, thank you for the courage to be openly gay. And East County, where?
El Cajon. It's near San Diego.
I know El Cajon.
So in answer to your question, nothing qualifies me to do this any more than anyone else that is here. Originally, I approached a friend of mine who's an ethnics professor of ethnicity in Oregon. She didn't have the time. Locally, there's a group called the BIPOC Project, and I talked with them about doing it, and they didn't have the time. So, you know, in some ways, I feel from some people of color that I've gotten a mixed message. One message is, no, white people are not qualified to talk about it. And then the other message is, people of color are not responsible for teaching us these things. So in between that, I had to ask myself, do I just stay quiet and not do this? Or do we do it? And the only thing that I'm trying to do here is really facilitate the discussion. But I do not consider myself any more qualified, you know, in terms of, I'm not more knowledgeable, I'm not more, you know, anything. It's just, I felt like this was a discussion that needed to be had, and we're having it. Yeah, Jacob.
I honestly mean no disrespect. And I know this is going to sound strange because this is part of the conversation where a white person will say, I know Black people. However, I have my nieces and nephews who are Haitian, and I've experienced racism in a way that's really raw, and it ooh, it makes me angry. And my sister-in-law has had to pull me back and say, this isn't okay, because right now you're being some crazy white knight and you can walk away with this. And people, I know you have a gay experience, but when you close your mouth, they don't know who you are. I have to wear this all the time, and my kids do too. And this whole movement right now, and I know we said we were going to get verklempt, and here I go, showing emotion. It not only influences us individually, but I feel it has a larger narrative because we all have our own individual experiences that tie into this. And it's hard to feel, where's my place in the larger movement? I want to show support. I want to give respect. I want to create change. But as a white individual, I don't know what that means for me in a way, even as an educator. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Jacob, thank you for that vulnerability too. I'm also an educator, so we're both teachers. And the one thing I can say before I let Karen jump in is that since we're both teachers, we can learn a lot about decolonizing the classroom so that those students who we have who are BIPOC can have their voices uplifted and elevated in our classrooms. Some of the things that are discussed in that are like, in literature, making sure that literature from different authors of different backgrounds is represented, putting posters on the walls that represent different ethnic backgrounds, these kinds of things that are considered that. So in the discussion that we're having here, and we start discussing possible solutions and ways that we can be better white allies, we can have those discussions as well. Karen, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to say, was uplifting those voices, not inserting ours, having empathy with ours, taking action where necessary. This discussion that we're having is so important because, like you said, it's not for people of color to teach us, it's for us to listen to them, but we have to have those conversations. Like Jacob said, it's not to say, well, wait a minute, I have a Black friend, I have a Native American friend. It's, they are exhausted. We can Google, we can read, we can go to libraries. We have, how many books that are free, and we can contribute, we can be active and support minority businesses. We can take so many actions that we maybe have been taking or not taking enough of, but it's time for us to be more, just more active in uplifting those voices, and then having the conversations ourselves with each other when we see somebody, like Melanie did for you. Check on each other, check each other, help each other so that we can become better allies. I used to call myself an ally, and then through listening, I realized that's not a label I can give myself. I can try to be one and be better and learn, and when I make a mistake, learn from that. But I used to have it in all my profiles with a hashtag because I wanted the communities to find me if they need me, but I've learned that that's awfully presumptuous of me if I'm not doing all the work. So I took it out, but I'm doing the work, I'm doing what I can, and I want to do more and learn more. So, well, ... That's where I am.
I guess we'll call ourselves allies in training. Melanie?
Yes.
I just also wanted to, there was a quote that I found that was really profound in chapter 2 on page 50. She said, the full weight of responsibility rests with those who control the institutions, which was really profound because if white people control the institutions, the responsibility for changing them lies with us. So we have to have these conversations so we're not fucking it up even more. Sorry.
That's okay, we're all adults here. Dave,
I teach children too, so I swear a lot when I'm not around them.
Dave, let me me get Dave's comments, and then if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to start talking about what we read in the book. Is that fair to go? Okay, Dave, hit us with it.
Yeah, just from my standpoint, you know, I don't think anything's wrong with you leading this discussion or from that perspective. To me, I think the discussions need to be had. And if the discussions are being had, whether it's in who's leading the groups and where it's being done, as long as there's learning going forward and wanting to make the right steps forward, that's the most important part. Because these discussions weren't happening, you know, 2 years ago. So whether they're, you know, like I said, whether you're leading it or whether Minister Farrakhan is leading it or whoever, as long as we're learning and collectively trying to move forward in the right direction, that's all that matters.
And I think too, when you have like a situation like this where people have so much trauma around it, no matter if you say it this way or that way, there's going to be emotional responses, and we just can't get hung up there, and we can't let that halt the forward movement. Like, we really have to just skip over that and keep going.
So let me just ask, let's try to, I'm gonna pull up my notes. I don't know if you saw, I posted some of my notes from the reading on the white fragility in the classroom and in the event. But let me just go around the room, as it were, and let me start with Kelly, because want to make sure all the voices get heard. Kelly, just right off the bat, is there something from the reading that stood out to you that you would like to share and discuss?
You know, I think what impacted me the most, that made me think the most anyway for this beginning, was I think it's chapter 3, where she starts talking about the different types, the colorblind, the aversive, the cultural racisms, and having an opportunity to kind of reflect all, you know, from a little girl to current day, like where did I fall into some of those traps, and then figuring out, you know, where can I make sure that that's not happening. And when you were telling the story of the Karen post with you and Melanie, I was like, I think that's aversive racism. You know, I was just trying to like identify, because it is a little bit. I mean, she's very thorough in her explanations, but it's also like really trying to drill it down to real time or real life and real examples, to be able to hear it in our own, you know, bubbles of worlds, so that it's easier to identify and easier to call out when we see it, and to feel comfortable. I think that's the bigger thing, right? To really feel comfortable in that knowledge that, yes, it is. No, I don't have to chill out and have a better sense of humor and all of that crap that you hear when you do kind of go, all right, hang on, back the truck up, because that wasn't the right thing to say.
Anyone want to add to what Kelly was saying just there?
I will. Part of the discussion we had, especially about chapter 3, was like, a lot of these impulses that we have are just human impulses, but put in the context of America specifically and our situation, they really did a bang up job of like capitalizing on human impulses and setting up a system where you don't even have to be intentionally racist to be participating. And so I think that's the part where we have to be able to be like willing to be checked. So I appreciate how you were willing to be checked, because that happens all the time when we're having these conversations.
And something that within this context too, that got pointed out, that makes it, that's one of the primary reasons that we get defensive, is we assume if you have racism, if you're racist, it means you're a bad person. The bottom line is we're all racist, because all of us benefit from a system that is racist. are we bad people because of it? No. If we identify the racism within us, and I love that she clarifies the difference between prejudice, discrimination, and racism. That gives it a very good context for discussion. That the system is racism. Racism is not an event, it's an ongoing system, right? Because we benefit from that system. That's why white people are racist. And once you accept that and see it, you realize I can be a good person and be racist. And when she, and you're right, Kelly, when she layers those levels of racism, and I was reading the aversive racism part, I'm like, well, there's your mirror for the week. And it was bitter. It was really bitter to read that part.
Yeah.
So let's see. Anyone final thoughts on what Kelly was jumping in there with? Okay, so now my wife Hae-sun is here. She didn't read it. I told her she didn't have to. She is joining us because she's had some experiences being Korean and speaking English as a second language that have allowed me to experience racism in a way that I wouldn't have without knowing her. But she hasn't read this, so I'm not going to put her on the spot about it. Who would somebody who's read it like to talk about what stood out to them in the reading? Go for it, Jacob.
I don't want to
I
get
will,
too
Michael.
bombastic, especially with a delicious Moscow Mule. However, I pasted in the comments, page 62 really spoke to me. I know that we've all had our own moments in lockdown, quarantine, wherever you're at in your own space, to really reflect on your own experiences. And I really started to reflect on my own experiences when I first started to look at racism in a strange way. And on page 62, and I know it's probably the last sentence there, even in religious iconography, including God himself. I grew up in a very religious household, and we had white Jesus everywhere. And when I started to study history and I pointed to a map and I went, the Middle East doesn't have many pasty Caucasians running around, my parents punished me. And I looked at race in a very different way. And when I saw this on page 62, I wanted to send it to my mother, but I didn't. And I started to see things around me. And what I've started to do every morning is, instead of looking at racial experiences from maybe a lot of my own perspectives, I've tried really hard in places like Reddit to look at other communities. And I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I watched a really cool YouTube video on the history of Aunt Jemima and syrup, and it took me on this crazy history rant. And I want to set up an exhibit in my classroom for my students to talk about how sometimes racism is just spoon-fed to us across the kitchen table over a Norman Rockwell painting, and it's all very fuzzy and warm. And yeah. When you start to question it and you stress some of those fuzzy memories around Thanksgiving and things that we grow up very comfortable with, people have a tendency to become defensive, because then you have to acknowledge that maybe your family was racist and those holidays were racist and everything else on top of it. I'm done.
They were racist.
They were. Somebody want to add to Jacob's thought there?
Don't forget Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of
Don't
the
get me
hardest
started.
things in dealing with family and trying to figure out, it's easy for me to call up Michael and have a diplomatic conversation with him about that whole thing on Facebook, but it's really tough to talk to your own family when they're telling racist jokes, and and you try to say something and you just get that, oh, you're so sensitive comment. So yeah, dealing with family in this is really tough.
And friends too. It made me think of Dumbledore at the end of Harry Potter. And I told Melanie this when she checked me. Standing up to your enemies is easy. For anyone who knows the book, Neville Longbottom gets big house points at the end. And he gets the house points because, as Dumbledore recognized, standing up to your friends, that's hard. And when
Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah. And when it talked in the last part of chapter 3 about backstage, I'd never heard that term before. Backstage is where all the white people talk, and it's a room of only white people, and that's where the racism comes out. That's where the racist jokes come out. That's where the racist comments come out. And I love the way she said, here's the different people in the group. They're the ones who are silent. They're offended, but they're silent. There's the ones who laugh and think it's great. And occasionally, there's the one who steps up and says, that's not cool. And so as I'm asking myself, what does it mean to be a white ally? I have to be honest and say, I have enjoyed telling racially based jokes. And there's a part of me that thinks, we shouldn't have to stop that. That's funny. But it plays on the very stereotypes that need to be broken once and for all. So is it a great sacrifice for me to tell jokes of another nature? No. And I think the best way I can be an ally is if I'm backstage, I need to be the guy that says, not cool, not funny. And when they tell me something like, you're being oversensitive, I got to challenge that too. And so in that vein, I think that backstage area for white people, where, as the author points out, we reinforce these values, that's maybe our best opportunity with family and friends to check this shit.
Yeah, because she mentioned that the dissenters were not always there. That was one of the groups they fell in, but that they weren't always present. And that's, I think, where we need to be present.
We can change the psychology of this if more of us are present dissenters in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, because that speaks to her other point that she makes early on, that and I think you summarized it in your notes on the Facebook group too, that those who are oppressed are not the ones that bring about change. It's only until the oppressors figure out this is not the right thing to do that then the change happens. So we have, it's imperative that we're dissenters.
Era, how about you? What were your immediate thoughts from the reading this week?
I didn't get through all of it due to work being people getting sick, but one of the things, because I did make some highlights, was that feeling that you get. This one. People of color may also hold prejudices and discriminate against white people, but they lack the social and institutional power that transforms their prejudice and discrimination into racism. The impact of their prejudice on whites is temporary and contextual. And I found that very kind of eye-opening, because I hear the term reverse racism quite often in a lot of the people that I see like day to day when talking about these kinds of talks that we need to be having. I also hear it while I'm at work. I work retail. I'm a store manager, and I hear all kinds of things from customers that come in being upset about one thing or another that we sell, and having to figure out how to stop what they're saying about people of color.
That brings up a good question, honestly, that I don't know if the book is going to address, but so you're an employee, you're a manager at a store. How do you challenge it there? You risk losing your job. That's tricky.
I'm gonna speak up right here. We risk it. I'm at the point where, like, screw that. You risk it. That's just
yeah.
my 2 cents.
And it's like I've always, you know, in my job, anywhere that I've worked, I said, you're never going to walk me out of here for doing the wrong thing. You may walk me out of here for doing the right thing, but then I can hold my integrity when I go out. And that should always be how you live your life, is that you have your, I guess your values, your morals, your integrity that you live by. And, you know, there's always another job. There's always another place to go. And if that's what happens, then something else is meant for you too. So, yeah.
I'm lucky.
Michael,
My
can I
boss is in this discussion right now, so I'm good to go.
Michael, as your colleague, I'd like to say that one thing we're doing at Media Arts Collaborative is we're going to start putting into our policies anti-racism and what we stand for. So when people say things, and when people come in or they may say things are inappropriate, it gives all of us as part of a community, no, we don't go with that. And you know that you're backed by this. And I think that's one. Am I going in and out? Oh, my internet's really weird.
I can hear you fully.
Okay, and that's one thing that's new as we go for equity councils. And I have a pretty progressive school. We have quite a few teachers. One of them happens to be on this panel that really do self-reflect and want to do what's best. And there's moments when we make it about us because we're white, and it's always been about us. And that's one thing I took away from the book. But it's also putting in language in our policy and who we are as a school. We are anti-racist, and we support everyone, and we want this to be part of the dialogue. So if a parent comes in and says something to a teacher, the teacher can confront that parent or say something without the fear that, and I wouldn't, but somebody else wouldn't. No, this is what we do at our school.
And we've had parents and kids say things like that. And it's a comfort to me as a teacher to know that I can jump in and say, let me point you to the policy about why you can't say that here. And let me explain as a human being why that was a horrible thing to say in the first place. Jacob, it looked like you wanted to throw something in there.
No, I don't want to interject too much. I just want to share an experience that I had recently with some of my friends as I was trying to explain white privilege and fragility and systemic racism, because it's hard to create that dialogue with other people if you don't take the time to educate yourself or reach out to people in different circles and really put yourself in uncomfortable situations. So what I told them is, I said, imagine you're in an enormous nightclub and there's a VIP lounge and you have the pass, and it's all based on your skin color. And your privilege isn't about sharing that pass with other people to the lounge. It's about going in the back alley and discussing ways you can burn the club down, because it's ratchet, it's fucked up. You have to like level it and go from a common place. And right now we are at a pivotal point in history where I'm going to start, I'm just letting everyone know, Monday, tomorrow, I am starting a class where I'm teaching summer school with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I am scared because the original curriculum that I get to design was all based on youth leadership, and I've changed it 4 times today. And after this discussion, I'm going to change it again. And I really want to give my students a voice. And I want to change history in a way that is, this conversation, I know it's being recorded, but you're all sitting out there in your same spaces going, what am I going to do? Like, we have to do something. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. We're sacrificing part of our Sunday, but I want to make real changes, like beyond discussing this. I want to go out and say, what can we do now? And I love the book, I love the quotes, but I want to know what each of us are going to do beyond this point to go out and make some changes, because I feel so passionate about this. This book really inspired me in ways that I haven't been in years. And I would just want to go out there and rip off my clothes and run around, and I don't know.
So, Jacob, let me, are you familiar with the idea of what's called decolonizing the classroom?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not familiar with the term right off my cuff.
That's fine. I just found, I've been doing this in my classroom for a few years. There's a book online that you could find, I forget the title of it, but if you look on decolonizing on Amazon, you can find this book. And I can certainly share with you a video of a workshop I did on this with my principal and other people. And there's ways to, especially for social studies teachers, to decolonize. And if you want to communicate with me after this discussion, I'd love to talk about it with you. And I think that the point that you're making is very excellent. As we have these discussions, it needs to lead, according to the norms, we're not going to have closure, but at least we can have steps we can take, ways that each of us can bring our talents and our personalities to bear to be part of changing the system. And since we are educators, and as she points out in this book, 82% of educators in this country are white, we have a challenge and a responsibility to democratize and decolonize our classrooms to elevate the voices of our students. And so you and I should probably talk a little bit more about that. But yes, when we have these conversations, I think it is absolutely important for us to figure out what our role in changing the system is. Because women didn't give themselves the right to vote. It was when there was dissent among the oppressor, and in that dissent, there was an agreement that we were going to change the system for the benefit of women who've been working so hard at it. Blacks did not free themselves from slavery. They inspired white people to change, to make that happen. And so we each have to find our place in it and then become that voice of dissent within the system. And each of us has a different place within this system that we can make changes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's our burden. It's white people's burden.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think it was an inspiration. I think it was an instance where they made them feel guilty by seeing what was demonstrated on the stage and what they had demonstrated they were. So, and at least one of the things I think that you guys can do is, so one of the things, if you're listening and listen to the book, while we were listening to the book versus reading it, the control at the government level, the control at the school level, the control at the media level. So one of those things is to really teach the truth of what there was, what really occurred. Because me and Erica were walking, I was like, it's like this. If there's that level of control, just think if Donald Trump was able to rewrite history, he would have had the biggest crowds. There would have never been any meddling. Everything would be great. There would be fewer deaths. And that's what happens in that control. When there's that control at that level, a racist level of control, everything's been written to really obscure the facts.
And as white people, the hardest thing when I deal with teachers about culturally responsive teaching is the nostalgia they have for like Gone with the Wind or, Swiss Family Robinson. A lot of the things that people hold dear are super racist, and getting people to the point where they're able to see that is going to be a rough ride. And
an example of the decolonizing for me in social studies, it came when I had a good conversation with friends of mine who were Pueblo Indians and a friend of mine who's Black. And we were just talking about history. And suddenly George Washington stops being the father of the country. Let me rephrase it. He doesn't stop being the father of the country, because without him, we wouldn't have this democracy. He willingly let go of the presidency, yay, George. But at the same time, the Haudenosaunee democracy, also known as the Iroquois, America's first democracy, they had a civil war when the Revolutionary War happened. Which side are we going to take? The British, the Americans? And George Washington decided to attack the only neutral of the 5 tribes and burn their villages with men, women, and children in it. Now, we love George Washington, father of our country. We love the cherry tree story, which is probably bullshit. In fact, almost certainly bullshit. But in terms of what we as history teachers can do, and in the discussion, I said the first thing a history teacher has to do is decolonize the mind and then re-educate yourself about the history. And to that end, I recommend, especially for anyone who's interested vaguely in the actual history, Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States, is probably the most objective history that points out multiple perspectives without browbeating or anything. There's also a version of his books available for younger readers too. But yes, what I would encourage everybody to do, and Dave is right, this is when history and social studies become very important, is we've all been taught bullshit history. All of us have. Because we can name at least 10 great white heroes. But do we know what Tecumseh did?
Christopher Columbus, sorry.
Totally. The greatest asshole since Hitler or King Leopold, right? And we've got Columbus Day. What does that say to indigenous people when we have a national holiday to celebrate that? When you go to a square in New York City and there's a statue atop of a pinnacle in the middle of the Manhattan. You know, I got told blacks don't care how you feel. Well, what does that statue say to every indigenous person in New York, in this country? Right? There's some perspective. And that's why if we really also want to be allies, we do have to re-educate ourselves about the history.
And I think that's what's important too for those of us that are parents, that we understand what is being taught to our children. I feel extremely lucky. Both of my kids are in charter schools, you know, and when they were both at Mountain Mahogany, which was a K-8, that was actually, I was an adult, I had kids, and they're in school, and they're learning about not Christopher Columbus, or they're not learning about the good things that Christopher Columbus, right? And I'm going, oh yeah, that's right. Ew, what, you know, and kind of that same process, right? So like, but again, like we're lucky. We have a school that has already said, no, we're not teaching that piece. But as parents, you know, when, you know, Jacob's going, what else are we going to do? Like that's my one small step for our family, right? Is to be able to take these 2 little humans that I created and make them better humans than my husband and I are, right? Like it may be a small step, but that's where I can see I can have monumental change in those humans, so that they, you know, if we're gonna have actions that, you know, grow out to other actions, let's start there. So knowing what they're teaching your kids.
Before we get Jacob and David, I just wanted to stop for just a second. Because hold on, I will get you. But I wanted this to be an hour. Is everyone okay with this going longer than an hour?
Well, I need to leave pretty soon. But.
Okay. David, and then we'll get Jacob.
Okay. So I just wanted to interject because I know I keep trying to say Kaylee. Yeah, just talking about the opportunity to send their kids to the charter school, right? That's a benefit of privilege, right? Being able to choose where you want to send your kids. So is that the beneficial route? Is choosing to send your kids somewhere else where you feel that they're taught that, or is it the best thing to send your kids where in your neighborhood where they have friends that are in that demographic or whatever, and forcing going to the board meetings and pressing the teachers to teach the appropriate things? So
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, and I think one thing parents can definitely do is take a more active role in understanding the curriculum of whatever school they send their kids to, and holding a school accountable for that curriculum. Now, there's a double-edged sword to that. I mean, I've had teachers come in and criticize me for having kids, encouraging kids to march against the climate crisis and saying, Mr. Dolce is teaching opinions. And I've had to defend, no, these aren't opinions, it's a scientific fact. Unfortunately, a lot of the parents who are invested in talking about curriculum are defending the white narrative. And what it needs now is more of the allies coming in. And in the same way backstage, we need to be the one that says that joke's not funny. Parents need to be involved in these discussions about school curriculum.
And
Yeah.
I think, oh, sorry. I know you had some in order.
Jacob, are you cool with Erica chiming in for a second? Okay, Erica, and then
Oh, please, Erica, please.
So one of the things is that I struggle with the most is, you know, my daughter goes to school and she is learning about these heroes who would have been enslaving her had they had the chance. In our world, they're not heroes, period. We don't celebrate Jeffrey Dahmer's good side. And so I work in the district and I'm an administrator, and she was taught about Columbus. She was given the choice to dress up like an Indian or a pilgrim. Like, our kids are still being taught lies. They're not factual historical events. And so I feel like what we can do is really sound the alarm with the facts that we have. It's not opinions. Like, these things for sure did not happen. They didn't sit down to dinner, and that's the end.
right.
But being taught as if it is, and she's going to be spending money with rapists' pictures on that. You know what I mean? We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I feel like we've been raised in a racist country
So
from its inception.
Jacob and I, and Jonathan, because we're teachers in a school, and Melanie too, but specifically in terms of history, Jacob and I have a shit ton of work to do. But systemically speaking, one of the things that I've been trying to encourage the PED to do, because a huge flaw in this is elementary school. Elementary school teachers are generalists, which means they don't have to know very specific details about everything. And so they're going to teach the history that they got taught. They're not going to get elementary school kids to question Columbus. They're going to call him a great explorer. And so one of the things I'm hoping, you remember being in elementary school, you had one teacher, right, the whole time, and you had the one class. Something that I want to push for is that you have an expert teacher who moves from class to class, which means the person who comes to teach the elementary school kids the history knows the history. It's not some casual exercise for them. And maybe we can prevent some of this bullshit history from being propagated when kids are at such an impressionable and young age. It's just but again, these are systems that.
Or Mike.
Yeah, Jonathan.
That I'm going to start doing at our school when we interview new teachers, ask them about equity, ask them about how they have reflected on the voices of everyone at the table instead of just the usual stuff. You ask, how's your management? How do you try curriculum? But then what are your terms about equity in this school? That way they're coming in with their eyes open that this is part of our part of what we do at our school.
Hiring is huge. Jacob, you've been very, very patient.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to share an experience, and I think Erica's seen this before in action. One thing that I think educators need to really do with the young minds is challenge each person they learn from. I do a lesson early on in the year because the students have a tendency to really like me. They go, oh, wow, he has tattoos, he plays video games, he's first gen Pokemon, I can trust him with anything he says. And you get this halo effect, bing, where I can feed them anything I want. And it's scary because as an educator, if I let my own agenda and biases go into my teaching, I can influence these kids. So what I do is I convince them that we've discovered this new creature. It turns out to be raisins and soda pop. If you've ever seen the experiment before, it's called sewer lice. I tell them famous YouTubers are coming to interview them. I have fake slides, data, all of this great flashy stuff. And the kids should be Googling it the entire time. And there's slides in between that say know for yourself and question everything, including me. I have Latin words in there like credula stultus, which means stupid and gullible. And none of the students raise their hands and question one of their favorite teachers. I think we should really challenge the people around us, especially the students that we teach, to question what we're telling them. As I teach you this, fact check me. You should be going to your own resources. Sitting here as part of your education is not a passive experience. This is your chance to challenge and change the system as you learn. Let's build the plane as we fly it. And I'm done. I'm getting off the soapbox.
And Jacob, I got to say that only reinforces what a compliment it was that 4 of my students decided to check me. It means, it kind of actually makes me feel good that I must have done something right, that 4 students felt comfortable nailing me on it, and they nailed me on it. But I want to pass this. Jonathan, you said you've got to go. What are your thoughts from this couple of weeks of reading? Are you with us, Jonathan? Okay, maybe a bathroom break. We'll come back to Jonathan. Karen, how about you?
We may need to come back to it, but this was something that stood out to me because one of the things that really disturbed me, as you know, in the last couple of months, just as all of this has unfolded in society, is this inherent notion that is false that Black people are dangerous and, you know, more dangerous or are dangerous. That is not true. And you see it everywhere. And as you soul search or as I've soul searched and realized, you know, that there's a difference between what you know and then just what we think, you know, because that's we're bombarded with in media, in social media, in the news, in movies and art, everywhere. It's systemic, but it is not true. And one of the lines, I didn't write page numbers down, I'm sorry, but one of the lines in the book, I think it was chapter 2, disparity in condition can only be the result of systemic discrimination. And so thinking that somebody is a criminal or is poor and they're poor because they're violent or they're a criminal, or, you know, starting to have stereotypes or view people that way is not okay and it's not right. And even if, I don't want to say you, but I don't have a different word right now, but even if you know better, but then somehow as society and as culture we think that way, it's not okay. It isn't. And I don't think that any of us have examples of a group of people who fit that. One person does not ever represent a group. And we have let ourselves as Americans do this to an entire group of people, and it is not okay.
And people have defended it with flawed crime statistics, for example. I've had to talk about it with my family. It's like they say, well, look, statistically, there's more Black people in prison than white people. Well, let's, as somebody said earlier, let's back that truck up and let's look at Nixon era politics and the war on drugs, and let's look at what was created. And by the way, for those of you who haven't seen it, this is where you watch the documentary The 13th. Which I could only watch in 15-minute increments because I would get so enraged I had to pause and walk away from it. But it's that created these things. There was a quote race is not the father of racism. Racism is the father of race. So all these stereotypes and cliches came about because there was economic advantage to be had from enslaving other human beings and stealing their land. And we do have to dismantle that.
So it's interesting, me and Erica, when we were listening, we were walking and we were talking about this. And I was like, you know, racism is probably somewhat natural in the sense that, but we also have to look at how countries are. So if you have a country such as France, right, where they're kind of more of a homogenous group, and people that go there are choosing to immigrate to France. And so those people are like, well, you need to assimilate to what we are because we're French. This is our country. It's always been our country. Well, this is a different thing that we have in the United States, right? Because you brought people here who didn't want to be here, right? And then you also then acquired land from another country and assume those people in within your nation, right? So in that stance, you have to look at that as a country. We should be making accommodations for everyone and treating everyone equal along those lines, because they didn't choose to be here and you chose to bring them here and also incorporate them into your country, versus a choice of immigration, right? Where you can have different requirements for those individuals coming in.
That's an excellent point. I mean, that again goes back to what Erica was saying. This is a white person's burden. Our
Yes.
ancestors, like it or not, forced people into this position. And so we have a responsibility to address that.
And you also have to realize that those people that you forced into this situation, maybe, so back in the days, in the house, in the slave house, my forefathers and foremothers and, you know, my ancestors were actually taking care of your ancestors to ensure that they made it to adulthood. You know, mortality was high at that time. So there were, you know, my ancestors were taking care of yours.
Like
breastfeeding them and built buildings and made this country what it is. You know, without free labor, the United States wouldn't be in the position that we're in. And so to somehow be able to turn your back on that, which I don't understand how that's even possible, you know, because I know that if somebody took care of my grandfather or great grandfather when he was sick and needed assistance, I don't think I could ever turn my back on their family. I'd be in debt with their family, and I would always make sure that I could make sure that they're okay. I would owe them a debt.
And I think too, what I've seen in these conversations that I've had in the past few weeks is just, I feel the dehumanization that people have really about Black people in this country. Because when I hear things like, well, what's going on with Black on Black crime? It's like, if you look at the statistics, it's the same for white people. It's just being reported differently. And so I'm losing my train of thought.
Even call it that. Nobody says white on white crime.
Right. Mm-hmm. It is all in the way that it's the language that we use. And we don't even teach slavery with appropriate language. We say slave master and we call people slaves, and say, instead of saying a people who were enslaved and kidnapped and murdered and tortured. And so just the words that we're using, it puts us in a good light as white people and skips over huge atrocities.
Well, this book these chapters made an excellent point about how white is not even considered a race. It's the default, right? And what's interesting, and I made a note of this, was if you read about a Black composer, an article you read about it is going to identify the composer as a Black composer. If you read about a composer, the instant assumption is that person is white. But a Black composer is a standout outside the norm. And so within even that context of language, in a history class or in the context of history, we have to discuss whiteness as its own race. If we're going to, it's the invisibility of whiteness and the acceptance of it as the default, and that everything else outside of it is outside the norm. That's another thing that I think she challenges very well in the book. I would also like to, if I may, make another point. Slavery is not unique to the United States, but slavery as it was carried out in the United States was unique. If you study ancient Rome, many people could be slaves. Slavery could be because you were punished for a crime. Slavery could be because you were a conquered enemy. Slavery could, but it was not dependent upon race. As such, if you go to the ancient world, you don't see racism in the ancient world. And as Dave points out, a slave could be freed. The woman who nannied your children when she got to a certain age, after she'd taken such good care of your children, could be given her freedom and even brought into the family with her freedom, with honor and respect. I mean, this is not saying slavery in any form is good, but the Romans didn't base it on abject cruelty. Whereas when you get to the United States, the Native American is the first slave, actually. But they realized that the Native American had a network of people who would A, rescue them, and B, fight alongside them. So they were a much harder victim to enslave. When they discovered you could get them from Africa, and you could put them on a boat, one person from one tribe and another person from another tribe, to the extent that they couldn't even communicate with each other. They were in isolation. There was no way for them to rise up. That was a perfect product for the slaver. And then when they got them to the United States, it was even more perfect, because if they ran away, they were easy to spot. It's the brown one over there. And so then it became about race. And then as a kid, you all must have asked yourself, how can you look in somebody else's eyes and see, even they're a different color, not see the human in them? That's when the eugenic scientists came in and came up with cranial size, the width of the nose, the shape of the eyes as a means of describing racial levels of superiority. The Spanish had what was called the casta system, which they used in the New Mexico territory and in Spain. And all of this was because there was an economic motive to create race. And that's where, as this whole mythology that Karen brought into this discussion comes from. Again, I have to argue that the best way for us to dismantle this is to really, really relearn our history.
Hey, Michael, can I add or ask a question here? This may be a stupid question. Are you saying that racism was invented in the colonies? Or I'm just curious, I'd like to hear more about that if you can elaborate, if you know any more.
Race was never really anything that people paid a lot of attention to until the until the slave trade. And then in order to psychologically and economically justify what they did, race was an invention. There's a really good series of videos on this called Race, the Power of an Illusion. You can see it on, if you go to PBS website, you can find it there. The first episode of it talks about the science of race and how really there is no race. The second episode talks about the history of how race was created. And the third episode talks about race in culture, how the only reality of race is in our culture. And as a support to what we're learning about history and white fragility, that might be a good place to go to learn more of those details.
Thank you.
Well, I found it interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Michael, I just wanted to go back to just the discussion on like slaves, because you know, you talked about it, how it happened in other cultures, but it was totally different. in a sense, in those cultures, a lot of times those individuals were able to keep their language and such and still be able in their families and still be able to communicate. Where slavery as it occurred in the United States was totally different. And you also have to remember that there was the Middle Passage where they actually created the slave was in the Middle Passage in the Caribbean, where they actually broke the people, where they actually, separated families. They traumatized women by raping men. They had horses, they tied men's legs and arms and had horses run different directions while women were pregnant so they could traumatize the fetus inside. So it's a totally different type of slavery that you're talking about. The person that they came here, that they brought here, was a broke person that had no idea, didn't understand their language, where they came from, who their parents were, so they had nothing. It was something that they could control, and that's what they wanted to do.
It wasn't indentured servitude.
Yeah.
It was sinister.
And then you get white people who will say, well, indentured servitude was just as bad. And with this in mind, we know damn well that that is not at all true. Indentured servitude might have sucked for some, but it isn't the kind of trauma that Dave rightly brings into the discussion, that's for sure.
And I would ask them, why are you taking a left? Why?
And that's
not the thing.
Right, it's that avoidance. And to be allies, we have to prevent one another from avoiding it. That left turn, we gotta say, no, come back around, come back around. You can't say, this isn't so bad because this was bad. That's kind of like saying, talking about rape and saying, well, murder is also bad. Well, we're not talking about murder. We're talking about rape. We can talk about murder another time, but let's get back to this thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah. So Melanie, Jacob, we'll get you, and then after we get you, Melanie and Michael, would like you to share your thoughts about the reading. I know that we've gone longer than we hoped, but I hope you feel as I do that this has been a really worthwhile discussion to keep going. So Jacob, and then Melanie and Michael.
Well, I just wanted to add on to the comment that you just made. Some of white privilege and power that I have requires me sometimes to run quality control for other people who might be in my same cool kids club to just say, shut the fuck up. Like, let's give someone else the stand right now. Here's the microphone for them. And I need to play usher. And I don't know how else to articulate it to people that sometimes, even on social media spaces, it turns into the white warriors out there behind their keyboards. And I want them to shut up. Like, okay, great. You have an awesome space with followers. Why don't you take a moment to just have that space for someone else, or reflect on another voice, because I don't want it to get lost in the white noise.
That is a brilliant, brilliant comment. I'm guilty as charged. I think if my racism could find any guilt as evidence last week, I think I might have a bit of the white savior complex too. And I got to put that shit aside, because that's ego talking too. That's our white ego. And really, in that regard, you're right. Uplifting other people's voices is the best thing we can do. And so, Jacob, one of the things I have to appreciate about you is you are bringing into this discussion ideas for what we can do that's solutions oriented. And that's a good one, because all of us in social media can do that, can simply say, I just want to ask the question and I want to let people speak and see where it goes. And that's a great comment. Thank you. Melanie and Michael, whoever wants to go first.
I just wanted to kind of add on to what you were talking about, making space to listen, because I think when everything kind of blew up at first, I felt guilty for being silent, out of fear, fear of fucking up, fear of alienating family, clients, friends. But then after a while, I realized how important it was to also to listen to what's being said. White people have had the soapbox for so long. It's time to step back and just listen. And so that's kind of, that's kind of the space that I'm in. And when she talked about silence, I had to, it was kind of in the beginning of the book, I had to really question my own silence. And where was I allowing fear to silence me, and where was I really making space to listen? That's all.
Well, Michael, for me, I just reading the book, there's a lot of uncomfortable sections in this book, and it's been a much needed eye-opening, I think, for me. And that I guess I've overlooked a lot of the things that she outlines in those first 3 chapters. I mean, I have a few notes here that kind of stood out for me. And one of the things that you were touching on earlier is, and I wanted, this may be a stupid question, is there a right way to, when you're in the back room and it's all white people and race is coming up, is there a right way, not a white way, but a right way to contest, views that aren't appropriate or are going the wrong way? I'm not sure if I'm bringing that.
I don't know if that's right, but we can share some ideas on that. That's a good question. Who's got a thought on that? You're in the back room.
Like somebody tells a joke, or even if it's overt or it's not, it's just plain racist. Is there a right way to contest that? It's like, no, that's not cool, and this is why? Or do you? I mean, I don't know. Is there a right way to bring that up? Because it does it can be uncomfortable when you hear that, and I'm just curious if there's a strategy for that or not.
Dave?
Well, the way I would say it is, you would approach it the same way that if you felt somebody was talking wrong about your daughter or your son or your mother or father, and
Right.
It's no different. It's like I always took it as, in my growing up. So I grew up in New Mexico, and I had been in spots where people may have said Hispanic joke or Native American joke, an indigenous person joke, and the reason I checked them because it needed to be checked at that point in time. And then 2, also I knew that they have shown themselves to me, because as soon as I walk out the room, they're going to say something. You could easily get it in me.
Yeah.
So the thing is, you just, if you have to take it as personally, if you're committed, you have to take it as personally as if somebody said something against someone in your family.
Cool.
I think that's the right answer. Thank you, Dave. That's a really great way to think about that one. So it's 8:34. I'm loving the conversation, feeling like this has been really useful. But I think maybe what we can do is just do a quick run around and just briefly share something you're walking away from tonight's discussion with. I know we're not going to find closure, but at least we've got some ideas to think about. I'll start with Karen. What are you thinking about that you're going to take away from tonight?
This has just been really good for me. It's made me think of conversations that I've had. My daughter is pregnant. She has 2 daughters, and her other side of the family is very racist. And hearing these conversations, truthfully, I'm very proud of her. She stands up to them. It has not gone well. They've disowned her, but she's not backed down. And she's going to have a boy. And she's voiced to me that she's scared. She does, she's come right out and said, we don't need another white male. And I've told her, but knowing the mom you are and how committed you are to being anti-racist, I don't think we're going to have just another white male. And, but just hearing this conversation and hearing how many people are committed to doing the same and looking for those solutions, it gives me hope, because I'm just not okay with the things happening, and I feel good about seeing other people who are also not okay, but it doesn't mean we all know exactly what to do. We're just committed to doing better and learning and then trying again to do better.
If you feel like bringing her into the discussion, she would be welcome. And I think she might maybe find some solace and comfort in that.
Thank you.
And thank you, Karen. Kelly, how about you?
You cut out, but I think you said Kelly.
Yep.
I still have so much swimming through my brain on these first 3 chapters, and I don't know that I can pinpoint one thing right now from tonight's discussion other than just continuing to hold myself and the people around me accountable. I don't know any other way right now, but nothing profound.
That's profound enough. I mean, knowing what to think about and reflect about is good enough. This is all a process. Jacob, you needed to get going. So what are your final thoughts after the discussion?
Wow. I have to go back to maybe the original epiphany that I had on 62 with just my own reflections on the way that I grew up as a child in a very waspy household. Yeah, we were poster children for Wonder Bread. That aside, this conversation that I've currently had with all of you wonderful people has even opened my eyes in ways that I didn't consider before. I try really hard to use my place of privilege to create dialogue and balance, but I live in a system that is broken, and I am looking at ways that we can tear the system down in a responsible way to build it up. I know that understanding white fragility is the first step, but I'm looking at where do we go beyond that? And that's why I'm excited to dig into this book, because I know the author's going to lead us there. I haven't even skipped to the end, so.
The butler did it.
Professor Plum in the hallway with the wrench. Yeah, we've all tried to peek, but I've tried really hard. I even put a paperclip there, so I can't look.
Jacob, thank you for joining us. And if you have to go, feel free to go. He's got lesson planning to do.
I got to go make dinner and then finish preparing for my class, but you've all been wonderful, so.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. We're going to be doing this again. Era, how about you? What are you thinking tonight now?
I feel like I'm very much in the same boat as Kelly. I am going to process a lot of this, but I do want to take some of the words that Dave said about confronting people basically when they say something, even as customers in my store, employees, things that we say that may be said in our back room, things like that, even possibly within the corporation, and go from there.
That's a great place to start, Era. We can all work in our spheres. And I think one thing we're all agreeing is if we stop being silent and we become voices of dissent in that backstage arena, we change the psychology of this. And if we change the psychology of this, then we can push forward to changing the system of this. Cool. Hey, son, you've been quiet the whole time and listening to every word we've said. What are your thoughts?
Well, I haven't read the book, but it was
Got to speak louder. I can't hear you.
I haven't read a book, but I learned a lot from the conversation we
Can you hear her, anyone?
um,
Or is she?
well, and then that made me realize that how much I was affected. Can you hear me?
A little
Yes.
louder if you
Okay.
can.
Okay. So that made me realize that how I was raised by I was affected by this view of white because I was Hollywood made movies and then the view of the races would be much like from the perspective of white. That's what I'm kind of realizing right now. So when I was here, my mom or other Korean, the old ladies, they're saying that, oh, you know, when you want to marry, they kind of like indicated that get a white male, white for your husband, right? That's not the reason that I chose you, but but that's the point that I learned. And then also, Dave mentioned that the Korea was colonized by Japanese for 40 years. So it was only 40 years, but still a lot of Koreans hate Japanese just because of that history. Only 40 years. Then I can only imagine that the Black community has that pain and then suffer and then anger, for those many years. So, but I think we kind of taking a baby step and then compare those years that we suffered. I don't know how long that would take to fix the where we want to be, but I think this is really good start, and then always little things add up and then make a big change, I believe. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Hasan. Let's see, Erica, how about you?
I'm just excited that we have the opportunity to sit and talk about this on a weekend evening. I started reading the book months ago and just kind of revisited it, but I just feel like this is a way overdue conversation. And I'm at the point now where I'm willing to risk my job, whatever I have to do to, effectively have these conversations. I'm not going to go wild at work, but I am going to be a steady, consistent, as unemotional as possible voice, because racism is kind of one of our foundational values in this country that needs to be done away with. And so, yeah, I'm excited we're doing this. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dave, first of all, I got to thank you. You've provided, we've said it's not the responsibility of people of color to teach us, but I think the perspectives you're bringing into this conversation is helping us to keep honest, helping us to remain objective. And I so appreciate you for doing this. What are your thoughts as we conclude tonight?
Well, I think, like I said, I think it's a good discussion. And like I said, again, I'm happy to see that this discussion is occurring and that people are looking to move forward. I think I'll kind of leave it at that, outside of a couple other things that are offside that. So for Karen, I just wanted to, so for your daughter, if she feels disowned, tell her, don't feel disowned because nobody owns her. It's her choice of where she wants to be, and she should find the people that accept her and that she feels loved and accepted. So that, and then in general, just also along the other lines of, how we, right now as a country, we are celebrating these essential workers, right? There's this big, huge celebration of like, oh, thank you, essential workers and everything. And just remember that for a long period of time, my people were essential workers. And there was no celebration, and there's no celebration at this time. So when does that ever get celebrated? Because it's never been celebrated. So
All right, thank you, Dave. That's something else to think about this week. Melanie, how about you?
I'm definitely in that place of processing. I've been really inspired by everyone's openness and vulnerability to help me overcome my fear of being silent, my fear that keeps me silent, not fear of being silent, fear that keeps me silent. And so I'm feeling inspired and more confident in being able to have those difficult conversations. I mean, just having that difficult conversation with you was a really great start. You know, being able to say to someone, that's, there it is, the white privilege, and have you respond so well, was really inspiring for me. So I think it's finding my voice really in all of this, you know, in the face of those racist ideas.
Michael?
I want to say thank you, first of all, Michael, for putting these discussions together. I'm looking forward to having more of them in the future and reading more of this book. It's been, it continues to be an eye opener for me, and how systemic and pernicious a lot of it is, a lot of this racism that's been kind of codified or institutionalized in this country. And I hope to have a better voice as well in the future against this. So thank you.
Sure, and I'm glad to do it. And I think my lesson is one that has a lot to do with a lesson I have in life. It's one of the reasons I embraced the philosophy of Buddhism. I think I have, ever since I started donating to Amnesty International in the 80s, thinking I was some kind of great white hero, what I have to teach myself to do, as Jacob rightly pointed out, is use my Facebook platform as a place where people can speak and I will listen. My lesson is a lesson in humility. Everyone who knows me knows I can talk and talk and talk until the end of the universe. And so I really have to challenge my own ego in this. I have to recognize that I am racist and I'm a good person at the same time. And as a good person, it's my responsibility to dismantle the discrimination and prejudice that I find in me, wherever it lurks and wherever it's spotted, and then to work hard to change this racist system. And humility is going to be, I think, key for me to be a better ally. On that note, unless anyone has anything final to say, we've got the next, we're going to read, let me find it, for July 25th, that's a Saturday. Is 7 p.m. a good time for everybody, or is another time better?
Seven's good for us.
Okay. So 7 p.m. on the 25th, and the chapters that we agreed we would read would be 4 through 6 for the 25th. I'll put the event on Facebook again, and we'll continue this discussion from there. Thank you all so very much. If, of course, I'm looking for feedback. If there's ways that I can be better at facilitating, if someone else would like to step into the role of facilitator just to change things up, let me know. But please feel free to give me feedback. I want to make sure that these are always productive discussions. And as I said, my job is to be a better listener. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.